So in today's episode or today's video, wherever you are watching this, I will be speaking about your shadow. I'll be speaking about why I'm speaking about it, why you need to listen, what is your shadow, and how does this affect your performance, with some small anecdotes from my life and how recent learnings within the last week have changed my perspective, and also the ways in which that it was actually detrimentally affecting my performance and what I'm going to do to change it, to fix it, now that I'm aware of it, just like you can be if you listen or watch to this video. So the reason that I'm speaking about your shadow self, and what that is this week, it was the first time that it was presented to me as an idea, exploring your shadow. And what I realized was that it was actually controlling my life more than I actually realized. And this is a recent thing. This is a recent thing in which a few weeks ago on a podcast, I spoke about two different forms of myself, not realizing that separating myself into two different forms wasn't actually the most beneficial thing for me to do, but more on that later. I learned about it within a men's circle doing some men's work. The topic of discussion was your shadow self, and an idea was presented to us. And as we were speaking through it, as other men were sharing their story and their experience of what their shadow is and what that means to them and how they integrate that shadow, I started to understand that this is not a concept that I've ever spoke about. This is not a concept that I've ever heard about. This is not a concept that I've ever analyzed within my life as to what my shadow self and how I've been repressing my shadow. And maybe somebody listening or watching to this might be doing the same. You might not be. I mean, if you're not interested in hearing about your shadow, if you don't want to delve into the deepest part of your being, if you're afraid of analyzing yourself, if you're not interested in improving your performance, if you don't see the correlation between how you view yourself and how that affects your performance, this video isn't for you. So I'm just giving a brief disclaimer, brief warning into that. On the flip side, if you are listening to this, why you should continue listening or watching. This was actually, as I spoke about, decreasing the quality of my life and my happiness in the now. When I separated two forms of myself, as I will allude to, it caused me to somewhat disengage with a certain aspect of my life, and I was actually living out of integrity. So if you are somebody who is interested into delving into the depths of yourself, if you are interested at being self-reflective, if you're interested in implementing 1% changes or 1% gains, then this is for you. So what is your shadow? Your shadow is essentially the part of you that you're afraid to show the world, is the part of you that you have been conditioned, the part of you that has been conditioned out of you by society in a sense of what is deemed to be good and bad, what is deemed to be right and wrong, what is deemed to be correct and incorrect behavior. There are no good and bads. There are no incorrect and correct. Essentially, it is a social construct. The only thing is the present, and these things nor are good nor bad. They just are, and that's kind of the reoccurring theme within this, as we will find out. But the shadow is the part of you that you're hiding from the world. And this was initially spoke about by Carl Jung, and a lot of recent work, which I went back and looked over, was addressed and highlighted again by Jordan Peterson, who is a controversial character, to say the least. He's for some, he's not for others. He is for me, so that's all I care about. So as Carl Jung describes, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. So the shadow, as described by Carl Jung, is the unconscious part of our character or personality that does not align with the ideal version of what we're aiming for. This is the version of us that Jung called the ego ideal. The contrast between the ego ideal and the shadow causes us essentially to reject and resist the shadow. And through our rejection of the parts of ourselves that we dislike, we unconsciously project them onto others. This can be seen easily in our dislike for certain people. Often the specifics that we dislike in others are indications of what we like in ourselves. There are often qualities that you dislike in yourself and you push them down or avoid them. This is called projection, and it can lead us to have a somewhat warped perception of the people around us. And how this is relevant in my life is that I try to go back and try to look at myself through a self-analysis and understand, okay, what are the parts of me that I deem as bad? What are the parts of me that I deem as, parts of me that I shouldn't show to the rest of the world, parts of me that don't align with conducive living with other people? And what I realized is, because I recently spoke about within a podcast that there are two forms of me. I spoke about my serotonin self and my dopamine self. My serotonin self was brought out in things like the Run Club, in things like the podcast, in things that I was given with no expectation of receiving in return. And this was a warm Brian. This was a gooey Brian. This was a Brian that's full of love, and a Brian that is open and embracing and accepting and can hold space for others. And then I spoke about dopamine Brian. I spoke about the Brian that is aggressive, the Brian that is competitive, the Brian that is motivated to an extent that is almost obsessive, the Brian that is focused, the Brian that is only keeps moving. The goalpost keeps moving in a sense that the second that I hit a goal, the second that I get something, I just look towards the next thing. I just look past it. And I was talking about the fact that I thought that my work, which is being a real estate agent, was taking out the dopamine Brian. It was taking out the worst side of me, quote unquote worst. What I didn't realize that I was doing is, because I was separating myself into two people, I was rejecting one and accepting the next. In times where the dopamine Brian was coming out in the serotonin Brian. So what I mean by that is, at times in the Run Club, or when I was quote unquote supposed to be accepting and open and full of love, that this other emotions, these other attributes started leaking into it, and I was being aggressive, or I was being not understanding, or I was being very forward. I then had some sort of a tailspin of like an identity crisis of like, okay, who actually am I? Like, who am I? Because I'm rejecting part of me, I'm accepting the other part of me. I'm saying this is bad and it shouldn't be here within my life, and that if I don't do this job and do something like the Run Club, or do something that is given with no expectation of receiving, then it will bring out the best sides of me, when that is just absolute bullshit. I mean, I can't have one without the other. Both are part of me, and both need to be treated with respect and integrated into one. Labeling one is dopamine Brian and one is serotonin Brian, I was automatically labeling the dopamine Brian as negative, as bad, as I shouldn't be that kind of way, when I had absolutely no proof to go from. Just because people told me that they saw a different version of myself Monday to Friday as they did on Saturdays, I took that personally and had that identity crisis, as I said, and I didn't realize that you can have both. Like, there are no goods and bads. Like, there are no negative and positives. Both need to be integrated into your life. And as a man, you do need that aggressive side. You need to be dangerous. You need to take responsibility. You need to be competitive. You need to be able to inflict damage when required, but not necessarily do so. So Jordan Peterson spoke about this. So he talks about fighters and like MMA fighters, the fact that they are able to inflict pain, they are able to be dangerous, but the fact that they're conscious of the fact that they can do that makes them less likely to actually display that and cause harm and be dangerous and hurt people, essentially. And how he carves that into other people's lives is, you need to understand that you can be dangerous. You need to understand that there are elements within you that can be dark. There are elements within you that might have negative thoughts towards other people, that might have negative thoughts towards yourself. And that's completely okay. Suppressing and rejecting that version of yourself is just going to suppress it further. And within that suppression, it just becomes this boiling pot that is bound to spill over. And because I separated those two forms of myself to such an extent, it made me have an identity crisis, as I said, question what it is, the things that I'm doing, are they worthwhile? Do they align with me? And I also was disengaged with my job, to be honest. Quite disengaged. I was kind of the opinion, well, if this isn't the truest form of myself, then why am I continuing to do it? When in fact, there were parts of me that were quote unquote serotonin brine that I was bringing into the job that I wasn't aware of. But if all I did was be that open, accepting person that was not dangerous, that was not dangerous, that was not aggressive, that was not competitive, if I did not include that in a performance-based role, such as real estate, then I would have been walked over. I wouldn't have done as well as I have. I wouldn't have been respected, because the true testament of a man and the true respect that I give to men are men that I know that have both, and have both in perfect harmony. The ability to be dangerous, the ability to be aggressive, that are competitive, that are motivated, that are on the other side introspective and self-reflective, and they are vulnerable enough to speak about how they're feeling. And I have so much respect to those kind of men. When I say that, I think of a man within the men's circle, and he changed my perception of the whole self-help, quote unquote, self-help bullshit out there, because I'm in a environment called a men's circle where men can come and share how they feel or whatever. And it seems like for some people from the outset that can be somewhat, quote unquote, feminine, as I used to identify with. But this man is the furthest thing away from a feminine character. This man embodies what it means to be a man and such masculine features, and is integrated within that self-improvement space and quote unquote, I keep doing quotes, but quote unquote spiritual space. But he breaks my definition of what I would expect to see in that kind of man. And he rejects a lot of the self-help space, a lot of the spiritual space, because it can be founded within ego, and it is becoming a status game of sorts, and a bit of a hierarchy in a sense of good and bad and a linear progression. And there is a lot of ego involved in that whole bullshit, and some of it can be so out there in terms of what I'm comfortable with and what is actually worthwhile, and what are the things that we're just doing to virtue signal to other people that we are self-improvement kind of people, that I am a kind of person who fucking meditates for 3 hours a day and can heal the wounds of 1,000 ancestors of my past, and I can change the weather when I enter a space. Like, there are lunatics out there, and a lot of people can correctly assume that going into some of those spaces that it is only going to be those kind of people. But this guy has broken my reality. And why I'm telling the story is because people need to understand that it's not only those kind of people in those spaces. There are sometimes, but there's certain spaces that you will find people like you, men that are dangerous, men that are aggressive, men that balance the line between masculinity and femininity to such a perfect degree that they are the true testament of a man. They have integrated their shadow to the best ability, and they are the truest form of themselves, regardless of what people think, regardless of the opinion of others. Because the most important thing to them is the opinion that they hold of themselves, the standards that they hold themselves to. Their dreams are their dreams and not dreams that have been inputted into them by society or family or whatever. Now, there's plenty of men within the circle that are struggling in certain respects, but I mean, you start to understand that the things you're struggling with are things that other people are struggling with, even though that they came from a different part of the world. As men, we struggle with the same issues. Looping back into the shadow is because it held me back so much to a certain degree. I didn't really integrate that part of my life because I thought that aggressive side to me that was lashing out sometimes, that was being very strict, that was being, judgmental of others or holding people to a high fucking standard, I was viewing that as bad. I was viewing that as something that should not be included in my life, and I need to wean that out. When in fact, I should lean into it more and integrate it into my life and then allow it to run its course. So I didn't realize how much that was holding me back, that it had taken my edge off me, even though I was consciously trying to make myself, I don't want to say better, I was trying to discover myself further. I actually put up an obstacle when there wasn't supposed to be, when I didn't fucking need to put an obstacle there. So how that has changed my perspective just from that men's circle on Tuesday and speaking about the shadow self is I'm going to integrate that more into myself in a sense of I'm going to be aware of it. I'm going to be conscious of it. I'm going to be okay with being aggressive. I'm going to be okay with understanding that I have the ability to inflict pain and damage on people, and that I have the ability to be dangerous, and that I'm not somebody that should be pushed around. It's not like I'm necessarily pushed around, but what I'm saying is that I'm going to lean into that further in all aspects of my life and really try and integrate the two instead of me separating this dopamine brine and serotonin brine. Because a specific example of this was at the run club. I doubt this person's going to be listening. But anyways, at the run club, somebody was like half an hour late. And then they asked me, okay, like they asked me, oh, I'm here, where are you? I've just arrived, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, we're literally running now. We're running. It started half an hour ago. He said, okay, I'll just meet you for a coffee when we come back. And then we met. And then we came back to the coffee shop and we sat down. We were all having coffee, and he came up to me and was like, he sat down, had coffee. I was more than welcome and more than accepting. I didn't say anything about him being late because I wasn't fucking bothered. And then he said, oh, what else do you guys do? Do you only do runs? You should do some other stuff. I'd be really up for that. And I was just like, fucking focus on doing the run first and then speak to me. And then I said it. And then after a few hours later, I was like, oh, that was bad. The worst parts of me came into a part that I'm supposed to be, all accepting and holding space and being quote unquote, relaxed and loving, whatever. And then I shunned myself and kind of gave out to myself and was a critic for it. And then only within the last week, I've actually taken some comfort into it. And it's like, okay, that's me regardless. This is just accepting the truest forms of myself. This is rejecting the good and the bad. This is accepting the fact that I can be kind and I can be forgiven, but I need to draw lines and I need to be assertive in certain respects because that is the truest form of myself. And doing that allows me to live with integrity. So as I said, going forward, I'm not going to have any shame around it. I'm not going to have any guilt of the deepest parts of me. I'm not going to have any shame around the parts of me that I'm afraid to show the world, the parts of me that have been told to me growing up that you should not be the certain way. So if you are a man and you're listening to this and you're curious about your shadow, it's who are you around the people that you're closest with? Who are you around with your closest friends? What are some of the ways that you are, and do you change in different environments? How are you with your brother? How are you with your close male friends? And is that different from how you are within a work setting? Obviously, it will be to a certain extent. But if it is complete chalk and cheese, then you need to understand that you're not integrating both. What parts of you are you afraid to show the world? Do you understand that you can be dangerous? Do you understand that you need to take responsibility? Do you understand that you can be powerful and formidable, but you are peaceful at the same time? Do you understand that? What are the parts of you how do you speak to yourself? What are some of the actions that you've taken and things that you've said that you've had shame around or guilt around? And in the men's circle, we spoke about the analogy of the Hulk. And he is a perfect example of somebody who hasn't integrated their shadow, because you have Bruce Banner and you have the Hulk. Bruce Banner is peaceful, he's quiet, he's almost a nerd, whatever. And then when he gets angry, the Hulk unleashes. And you have two forms of themselves. And apparently in the last movie, which I have not watched, in the Avengers, he integrates both and he becomes one. And the same thing needs to be taken into your life. You need to integrate both. Where are you in your life that you're completely two different people? I have seen people be two completely different people. And it's fucking weird. Like I've worked with somebody who is completely different with his clients, and then they could just close the door and then he just starts shouting at everybody else. And like just screaming like profanity at the top of his lungs. And then a client walks in the door and he's just very feminine. And that's a true testament of somebody who is living out of alignment. That's a true testament of somebody who has not integrated both correctly. That is a true testament of somebody that has had the dangerous or aggressive or the shadow self beaten out of them. Now, this isn't only saying that your shadow self has to be this aggressive person. You could be an aggressive person and the shadow part of yourself could be afraid. It could be alone. It could be you're insecure. It could be the way that you speak to yourself. It could be the fact that you're shameful and that you're afraid and that you're whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be this kind of stereotypical aggressive side. It can be the other side. And the main overarching theme here is be self-analytical. Understand that you need to integrate the both. Understand that this is actually something that can change the way that you view yourself. That you don't have to be guilty about some of your behaviors. That you don't have to be shameful. Because there's no point in attaching shame or guilt in the past to something that you have done. The only thing you can control is the present and what you do in the present moment, and not having any shame or guilt about you being yourself. Because I would rather you be yourself than be a character or have a fucking mask up. It's gotten to a stage where I would rather be rejected for who I am than be accepted pretending to be somebody else. Because for so long in my life, I have changed who I am for who people have wanted me to be. And it doesn't feel like that there's a lot of issues there at that time, but the compounding effect of that, you drift further and further away from who you are and who you're pretending to be. And you have veered so far off course that you don't fucking even know who you are anymore. And all it will take is just completely slicing yourself from that current environment, removing yourself and trying to find out who you are. And that happened to me. And that was a perfect example of that. I was living out of alignment. I didn't know who I was. If you're somebody, I tend to be quite adaptable sometimes, and I find it easy to mold into the person that some people want me to be. And that has been at my own detriment. It has been a gain in some things within real estate because I can be adaptive with some of my clients, but on a personal level, it has actually been to my detriment. So now, the Brian that you see from now, the Brian that you see on a daily basis will be the Brian that I am at home. There are no inconsistencies. It is congruent. I am who I say I am, regardless. I don't care what people think of me. I don't care what you think of me. I'm going to be ruthlessly myself and see how the world accepts it. And I think that you'll find your niche within that. Like, I think the truest form of yourself, you will be your own niche, because nobody can beat you on being yourself. Nobody can compete with that. You are individual, and as a result, there are certain skills that you have that are different from other people. You need to lean into that. What is your unique selling point? What is your shadow? Have you integrated it? Or are you two different people? A certain kind of person in the open, and then somebody completely different behind closed doors? Or do you view yourself as two conflicting personalities? You need to integrate both. And after you integrate both, you can stop having that internal conflict. You can focus on the most important things. And you can forget about any shame or guilt you might have attached with the past, and focus on the present. Focus on what you can have, and focus on the elements that are within your control, and just fucking forget the rest. Because that is what it will take to really increase your performance within any given industry.